5 Lives for One Horse by Rolf Boldrewood. Yes, it does seem a goodish price to pay for a half-bred mare worth £10 at the outside, said old Bill, the cook for the rouseabouts at Jergolo Station, one wet evening as the men gathered round the fire after supper, with their pipes in their mouths. It had been wet for 3 days, so there was no shearing. Very little work for the other men either, 100 strong, as the wet-fleeced sheep were best left alone. The shearers were sulky, of course. They were eating and paying for their own rations. But the ordinary pound-a-week men, whose board with lodging was provided for them gratis, were philosophically indifferent to the state of the weather. "I don't care if it rains till Christmas," said the dissipated-looking youth, who had successfully finished a game of euchre with a dirty pack of cards and an equally unclean companion. "It's no odds to us, so long's the creeks don't rise and block us going to the big smoke to blue our checks. I don't hold with too much fine weather at shearing time." "Why not?" said his late antagonist, staring gloomily at the cards as if he held them responsible for his losses. "Why not?" repeated the first speaker. "'Cause there's no fun in watching of blooming shearers making their £1.30 bob a day while we can't raise a mag over 3 and 6. At it all hours like so many working bullocks and turned out the minute shearing's over, like a lot of unclaimed strangers after a cattle muster." "Why did you come here at all?" asked a tall, broad-shouldered cornstalk from the neighbourhood of Penrith. "Nobody asked you. There was plenty for the work afore you struck in. It's you town larrikins that spoil the sheds. Blackguarding and gambling and growling from daylight till dark. If I were the boss, I'd set bait for ye, same as the dingoes." "You shut up and go home to your pumpkin patch," retorted the card player with sudden animation. "You Sydney-siders think no one can work stock but yourself. You've no right this side of the Murrumbidgee, if it comes to that, and I'll make one of a crowd to start you back where you came from and end all you blackleg lot." "Put up your hands, you spieler," said the New South Wales man, making one long stride toward the lightweight, who, standing easily on guard, appeared in no way anxious to decline the combat. "Come, none of that, you Nepean chap," said a good-humoured authority voice. "No scrapping till shearing's over, or I'll stop your pay. Besides, it's a daylight start to-morrow morning. I've a paddock to clear, and the glass is rising. The weather's going to take up." This was the second overseer, whose word was law until the cobbler was shorn, and the last man with the last sheep left the shed amid derisive cheers. After a little subdued growling, the combatants, there being no grog to inflame their angry passions, subsided. "What's that old Bill was saying about horses and men's lives? I heard it from outside," demanded the centurion. "Any duffing going on?" "Why, Joe Downie passed," the remark made answer a wiry-looking old hand, then engaged in mending one of his boots so neatly that he might have passed for a journeyman shoemaker, had it not been an open secret that he had learnt the trade within the walls of a gaol. That if a man was to shake a horse here and ride him into Queensland, he'd never get copped. "Oh, wouldn't he, eh? And why did Bill get his hair off?" "Well, Bill, he says, you're a damned young fool, says he. I've seen smarter men than you lose their lives over a £10 horse. Yes, and bring better men to the same edge." "But he said something about 5 men," persisted the overseer. "What did he mean by that?" "What did I mean by that?" said the old man, who had now drawn nearer, in stern and strident tones. "Why, what I say. It's God's truth as I stand here, and the whole 5 of them now is in their graves. As fine a lot of men, too, as ever you see, all along of one blasted mare worth about 2 fivers, and be hanged to her." The old man's speech had a sort of rude eloquence born of earnestness, which chained the attention of the variously composed crowd. And when Mr. MacDonald, the overseer, said, "Come, Bill, let's have it. It's a lost day, and we may as well hear your yarn as anything else before turn-in time," the old man, thus adjured, took his pipe out of his mouth and seating himself upon a three-legged stool, prepared to deliver himself of a singular and tragic experience. William James, chiefly referred to as Old Bill, was a true type of the veritable old hand of pre-auriferous Australia. Concerning an early voyage to Tasmania he was reticent. He referred to the period ambiguously as "them old times," when he related tales of mystery and fear, such as could only find place under the regime of forced colonisation. No hirsute ornament adorned his countenance. Deeply wrinkled, but ever clean-shaved, it was a face furrowed and graven, as with a life record of the darker passions and such various sufferings as the human animal alone can endure and live. Out of this furnace of tribulation Old Bill had emerged, in a manner purified and reformed. He gave one the impression of a retired pirate, convinced of the defects of the profession, but regretful of its pleasing episodes. Considered as a bush labourer, a more useful individual to a colony did not live. Bill could do everything well, and do twice as much as the less enervated industrialist of a latter day. Hardy, resourceful, tireless, true to his salt, Old Bill had often been considered by the sanguine or inexperienced employer an invaluable servant. And so, in truth, he was, until the fatal day arrived when the check fever assailed him. Then, alas, he was neither to hoard nor to bind. No reason, interest, promise, or principle had power to restrain him from the mad debauch when, for days, perhaps for weeks, all semblance of manhood was lost. However, he was now in the healthful stage of constant work, well fed, paid, and sheltered. Cooking was one of his many accomplishments. In it he excelled, while, despite his age, his courage and determination sufficed to keep the turbulent rouseabouts in order. In his leisure hours he was prone to improve the occasion by demonstrating the folly of colliding with the law, its certain victory, its terrible penalties. And of the gloomy sequel to a solitary act was the present story. "I mind," he began, pushing back the grey hair, which he wore long and carefully brushed, "when I was working on a run near the Queensland border. It's many a long year ago, but that says nothing. Some of you chaps is as young and foolish as this Jack Danvers as I'm a-going to tell ye about. Well, some of us was starting a bit of a spree like after shearing. We'd all got tidy checks. Some was going one way and some another. Jack and his mate to Queensland, where they expected a big job of work. Just as we were saddling up, some of us had one Neddy, some two, a mob of horses comes by. I knew who they belonged to, a squatter not far off. Among them was a fine lump of a brown filly, 3 years old, half-bred but with good action. 'That's a good filly,' says Jack. He'd had a few glasses. 'She could be roped handy in the old cattle yard near the creek. Lead easy, too, 'long with the other mokes.' 'Don't be a darned fool, Jack,' says I. 'There'll be a bloomin' row over her, you take it from me. She's safe to be missed, and you'll be tracked up. Damn it all, man,' says I, 'what's a 10-pound filly for a man to lose his liberty over? If it was a big touch, it might be different.' 'You're a fine cove to preach,' says he, quite savage. The grog had got into his head, I could see. 'Mind your own business.' I heard his mate, he was a rank bad 'un, say something to him, and they rode away steady, but the same road that the mob had gone. I went off with some of the other chaps as were inside having a last drink, and thought no more about Jack Danvers and the brown filly till nigh a year after. Then it came out. The filly had been spotted working in a team by the man that bred her. The carrier bought her square and honest, had a receipt from a storekeeper. They found the storekeeper in Queensland, He'd bought her from another man. What sort of a man? Why, a tall, good-looking chap, like a flash shearer. Word went to the police at Wauwilla. It was Jack Danvers, of course. They'd suspected him and his mate all the time. Well, Jack was nabbed, though he was out on a Queensland digging far enough away. They sent up his description from the shed we'd left together, and he was brought down in irons, as he made a fight of it. The storekeeper swore to him positive as the man that had sold him the brown J.D. filly, old Jerry Dawson she was. The jury found him guilty and he got 3 years. Now I'm on to the part of the play where the ante-up comes in. You mind me, you young fellows, it always does sooner or later. He'd no call to shake that filly. I said so then, and I say so now. And what comed of it? Listen, and I'll tell you. Death in 5 chapters, and so simple, all along of an unbroke filly. Now, Jack wasn't the man to stop inside of prison walls if he could help it. He and another chap made a rush one day, knock over the warder and collar his revolver. Another warder comes out to help. Jack shoots him dead, and they clear. Man's life number 1. Big reward offered. They stick up a roadside inn next. Somebody gave them away. Police waiting on them as they walk in dead of night. Soon as they see the police, Jack shoots the innkeeper, poor devil. Thought he'd sold 'em. Man's life number 2. Jack and his mate and the police bang away at each other at close quarters. Trooper wounded, Jack shot dead, mate wounded, dies next day. Man's lives number 4. Who gave the office to the police and collared the blood money? Friend of Jack's, a pal. 500 quid was too much for him. What became of him? Job leaked out somehow. Friends and family dropped him. The money did him no good. Took to drinking straight ahead and died in the horrors within the year. Man's lives number 5. Yes, he was the 5th man to go down. £2 apiece their lives fetched. They're in their graves because Jack Danvers was a damned fool. And when he was young, strong, good-looking and well-liked, must go and duff a man's mare out of sheer foolishness. He didn't see what was to come of it, or he'd have cut off his right hand first. But that's the way of it. We don't see them things until it's too late. But mark my words, you young chaps, as has got all the world before you, take a fool's advice. It don't pay to go on the cross. Never did, and there's no one has cause to know it better than old Bill James. By George, said the overseer, that's the best yarn I've heard for a year. And if the parson preaches a better sermon when he holds service in the woolshed next Sunday, I'll be surprised. End of 5 Lives for One Horse by Rolf Boldrewood.